Hi everyone, it's Katrina, Tiny Egyptian Fetus. A tiny fetus discovered inside an equally tiny coffin has proved to be the youngest Egyptian mummy ever found. The coffin itself was discovered over 100 years ago, but it was only recently that researchers in England completed a CT scan of the coffin to see what was inside. They initially thought the coffin held the internal organs of an adult who was mummified inside a much larger coffin. But they were shocked to see that it contained the tiny mummy of a fetus, likely only 16 weeks old at the time of death. According to officials at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, it's possible that the fetus perished from a miscarriage, as it never fully lived outside of its mother's womb. It must have been such a devastating event that the mother chose to have the unborn infant buried with all the respect that any other person would receive after death. The coffin was originally found in Giza in 1907 and only measured 17 inches long. It was buried around the year 644 BC and was decorated in painstakingly small carvings. After its discovery, it was cataloged and stored inside the museum because nobody believed there was anything except organs inside. However, once they did the CT scan and found a miniature skeleton, researchers were left speechless. This is now the youngest mummy ever discovered, even older than the two fetuses found in King Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. The Pateshwar Cave Complex. The district of Pateshwar in India is famous for its fascinating rock-cut shrines and mysterious temples. There are approximately 8 ancient caves dedicated to Lord Shiva, one of the principal deities in Hinduism. Shiva is the god responsible for creating and transforming the universe, and is also known as the destroyer of all things. But Shiva isn't the only god depicted at the Pateshwar temple complex. There are statues and ancient stone carvings of other deities, some of which are so old, nobody even knows who they are anymore. Many of these temples are in terrible condition, crumbling a little more every day, and they are entirely overgrown with vegetation. The whole place is crawling with rat snakes, wild pigs, monkeys, and the occasional peacock. Some of the most shocking features inside the temple complex are the almost countless Shiva lingams littered throughout the site. These are fairly ordinary-looking symbols, with each one almost resembling a stone thumb. The lingams are a representation of Lord Shiva, a symbol encapsulating all the energies of the physical world, as well as the world beyond. It's an emblem that can be found in just about every Shiva temple in India. However, at Pateshwar, there are thousands of them. Nobody really knows why there are so many of these symbols here, or what their purpose is. It's not even clear when exactly these cave temples were constructed, although some of the newer temples at the site were likely made around the 16th century. The mysterious settlement. When Captain James Cook discovered Norfolk Island in 1774, he described it as a paradise. It was unoccupied, littered with beautiful trees, and ripe for the pillaging. Cook quickly declared the island for the British Crown, although these days it's an external territory of Australia. It's located in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific Ocean, about 900 miles from Australia's nearest shoreline. Even all these years later, there are only about 2,100 people living across Norfolk Island. However, just because James Cook found the island unoccupied doesn't mean it wasn't inhabited at some point. When the Australian Museum did a scientific expedition on the island to check its biodiversity, they found something unexpected. They discovered the remains of an ancient Polynesian settlement. Dr. Amy Mosig-Way from the Australian Museum says the find is 100% conclusive. Ancient stone tools were uncovered in the dirt, along with the remnants of structures. The buildings and artifacts found here date back to about 1250 AD, when the Polynesians occupied New Zealand and many islands across the Pacific. This is a huge mystery, because it's never before been confirmed that humans once lived on the island. But now we know that people were there at least 500 years before Captain Cook ever showed up. Unfortunately, for the time being, we don't know where these people came from, where they went, or what they did while they lived on the island. Domesticated wolves. Researchers discovered canine fossils inside a small cave in southern Germany. The fossils inside date back between 17,000 and 12,000 years ago. When scientists conducted DNA analysis of these canine bones, they found a mix of dog, wolf, and fox remains. The strangest part of all is that the three distinct species of canine enjoyed a healthy diet of low-protein food, most likely provided by humans. Researchers found evidence that human beings, primitive cave dwellers, were feeding the dogs, wolves, and foxes. But this is hardly the most exciting part of the discovery. According to Dr. Chris Baumann from the University of Tübingen, scientists believe the cave may have been the epicenter for the earliest wolf domestication in Europe. They were able to link the genetic lineages of the canines to the entire genetic range from ancient wolf to domestic dog. Scientists have long known that domestic dogs broke away from wild wolves about 16,000 years ago. That corresponds to the date of the bones found in the German cave. This mysterious cavern seems to have been some kind of prehistoric puppy mill. Here they mixed dogs, wolves, and foxes to create the first domesticated animals. Our ancestors may have been living in caves, but they were clearly smart enough to partake in the genetic manipulation of wild animals. Stone Age Child's Grave. The grave of a child who lived 8,000 years ago was found in eastern Finland in 1992. It was discovered in the town of Outokumpu, and it's now known as the Majunsuo grave. A new service trail was being made in the forest, and workers noticed a splotch of bright red ochre staining the dirt. This is something you typically see with rock art and ancient burials, so it was clear to researchers that something was hiding underground. However, it wasn't until 2018 that the Finnish Heritage Agency began to excavate the spot. In ancient Finland, prehistoric people buried their dead in underground pits. This was over 6,000 years before the Vikings ever boarded their longships and started pillaging European shorelines. One of the issues in Finland is that their soil is so acidic that most ancient remains are destroyed within a very short time. Here, researchers found the grave, but they barely discovered any remains at all. What they did find was a couple of teeth, fragments of some bird feathers, canine hair strands, and plant fibers. These artifacts were recovered when researchers combed the burial site searching for microscopic evidence. They soon learned the teeth belonged to a child between 3 and 10 years old. The feather fragments likely came from a waterfowl and currently represent the oldest feather fragments found in Finland. It's likely this child was wrapped in clothing made from waterfowl skin and was then laid carefully on a bed of feathers before being buried with great care. The child was also placed in the ground with an arrow laced with falcon feathers and may have had their beloved dog or wolf buried at their feet. Either that or the child was wearing shoes made from wolf fur. We'll likely never know who this child was or what clan they belonged to, but this is currently one of the best preserved prehistoric graves found anywhere in Finland, and it shows just how much they cared for their dead. It's shout-out time! Big thank you to Mrs. John Winchester and Eddie Newingham for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. We'd love to have you! Burana Tower. Burana Tower, located in the Republic of Kyrgyzstan, is the last standing monument of the great city of Balasagun, which is otherwise completely gone. This city was originally built by the Iranian civilization known as the Sogdians roughly 2,000 years ago. The region was then conquered by the Karakhanid nomads from Mongolia and Siberia, and in the years that followed, the Karakhanids converted to Islam and began to build mosques. However, the rise of Islamic beliefs led to the downfall of Buddhism in the area, which ultimately contributed to the city of Balasagun's demise. This city was already in serious decline by the 12th century. The Burana Tower was then built as an attachment to one of the major mosques within Balasagun. This structure is unique because it shares architectural styles from the original Sogdians as well as the newer Persians. However, the Mongols came in 1218 and decimated the city of Balasagun. Yet for whatever reason, they did not destroy the tower. Most of this city was left a smoldering ruin, but Burana Tower miraculously survived. In the 15th century, the earthquake hit the city and destroyed everything that wasn't already crushed by the Mongols, except the tower. It has remained standing all these years, although it has sustained a fair bit of damage. Even in the 20th century, Russian settlers stole bricks from the ancient site to build their own houses. These days, the tower is an archaeological marvel. There is nothing else that even suggests an ancient city once stood in this grassy valley, except the tower standing 82 feet tall against the sky. Rare gold sword pommel. A mysterious solid gold sword pommel, or handle, was discovered by a metal detectorist near Blair Drummond in the UK. The pommel has been deemed an exceptionally rare discovery, with the small artifact worth over $30,000. The senior curator from the Medieval Archaeology and History Unit at National Museum Scotland says nothing like it has ever been found in the United Kingdom before. The sword pommel is impressive, expertly crafted and decorated with remarkable detail, but nobody knows who it belonged to, where it came from, or if it's evidence of a previously unknown ancient battle. Upon closer inspection of the artifact, archaeologists realized it was crafted in the shape of a bird. There is a beak at each end, and it has the eyes of a bird of prey. It appears to be a mixture between Anglo-Saxon art and Christian iconography. The sword pommel is also decorated with mythical beasts, the crucifixion, and the tree of life. It's rich in tiny and very intricate carvings, making it even more of a mystery. It's hard to imagine what the sword had once looked like. We don't know exactly when the sword handle was made, but it was likely around 1,000 years ago at the beginning of the Middle Ages. It must have belonged to a very skilled warrior, or at least someone of great importance, maybe even a king. The vampire. Scientific detectives recently used new cutting-edge technology to uncover the identity of a vampire. The vampire's corpse was discovered about 3 decades ago in Griswold, Connecticut. He was found with his arms crossed in the shape of an X across his chest, something that was done in the 19th century if a person was believed to have supernatural powers. Somebody thought this guy might rise from the grave and feast on the blood of his neighbors, so they placed his arms over his chest to prevent that from happening. It's unlikely this individual, a man named John Barber, was a real vampire. It's believed he suffered from tuberculosis, which typically causes people to cough up blood. In the 19th century, Americans thought people who had tuberculosis might be vampires, coughing up the blood of their most recent victim. And so, rather than being helped, these sick people were usually treated as monsters. Scientists with Parabon Nano Labs performed DNA analysis on the unidentified remains of the alleged vampire. He's been called John Barber all this time because of the markings JB55 on his grave. Historical records showed someone living in the community named John Barber around the time of his death. The team then took things a step further and reconstructed his face. Machine learning models were used to determine the vampire had fair skin, brown hair, brown eyes, and a lot of freckles. They then used 3D imaging techniques to recreate what he looked like, and honestly, he resembled a villain from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. World's oldest chess piece. Chess is one of the oldest games in the world, and its name is derived from the Persian word for king, Shah. Its origins can be traced back to India around the 6th century BC, at least 1,500 years ago. During the mighty Gupta Empire, the game of chess was called Chaturanga, and it was played by all the most important members of society. Researchers believe the game spread from India along the Silk Road, was picked up in the Middle East, and somehow made its way to Europe. It was the Europeans who changed the name to chess, and over the years, the rules of the game evolved into what we know them as today. In 1991, the oldest game piece was discovered by archaeologists in the Middle East. John Oleson from the University of Victoria believes a sandstone figure found at a site in Jordan is the oldest chess piece found anywhere in the world. It appears to be a rook or a castle, recovered from the site of Humayma. This place was an old trading post established in the 1st century by the Nabatean kingdom, the same people who built Petra. John Oleson says the piece was likely meant to look like a chariot when it was first carved, since rooks were originally chariots and not castles. In fact, the queen was once called the vizier. It didn't become the queen until the English changed it in the 15th century. Ancient footprints. The northwest coast of England is home to a staggering number of prehistoric animal tracks fossilized in ancient mud. There are also human footprints here. with the oldest dating back 9,000 years, and one of the youngest coming from the medieval days, about 1,000 years ago. Dr. Alison Burns recently found a perfectly preserved footprint that belonged to a young man who walked across the shoreline 8,200 years ago. This individual's print is extremely unique because the doctor recognized a bunion on their little toe. People back then didn't typically wear footwear. Because they were barefoot all the time, whenever they sat down, their little toe would rub against the ground. This usually caused bunions. The whole area was once a tidal mudflat, which would explain why the footprints were found on the beach in the first place. Ancient humans walked across the mudflats long before it was ever a beach, and their indentations in the muck were then baked in the scorching sun. This created a solid cast of the footprint, and then it was buried for millennia. It's a mysterious thing to behold now because it shows just how different the UK was thousands of years ago. It was a mudflat teeming with prehistoric oxes, ancient lynx, and extinct species of wolves. The Armenian Pyramid. One of the most shocking discoveries in recent days has been a pyramid in the Ararat Valley. This pyramid was discovered in Armenia, one of the last places on Earth most people would expect to find such a structure. For the last several years, the National Academy of Sciences of Armenia has allegedly been investigating the unusual pyramid, which was built between 3,000 and 2,000 years ago. Researchers say the structure resembles step pyramids found in Mexico. The structure itself was discovered near the rural village of Getazat, buried underneath a mound of soil. It was completely hidden beneath the dirt, making the pyramid look a lot more like a natural hill than anything made by human hands. The pyramid rises about 82 feet from the ground, and archaeologists found ornamental stones in its ruins. They even discovered a staircase that appears to be winding up to the top. However, for some reason, archaeologists haven't done any major excavations yet, and it's very difficult to find any official information on the Armenian pyramid. It's unclear if the lack of information is because local archaeologists don't have funding, or if there is just not enough interest. Perhaps in the future we can get to the bottom of who built the pyramid, or what it might be hiding. Aztec God of Alcohol. Archaeologists in Mexico have come across a very interesting mural. The artwork depicts an ancient Aztec god wearing a feathered headdress. It's believed the god is Tepoztecatl, the ancient god of alcohol. The wall drawing was found at a convent in the city of Tepoztlan, which is not the place you would normally expect to find a god of alcohol. However, researchers believe the painting could shed some light on the relationship between the indigenous population and the Catholic Church in the 16th century. The painting itself was hidden underneath several layers of whitewash in the convent of the Nativity. The convent was built sometime between 1555 and 1580 for the Order of Dominicans. It's believed the convent was used for the mass conversion of natives to Christianity. In order to do this, it's possible the Christian priests allowed Aztec gods to be incorporated into religious lessons. In the 16th century, the conquered Aztec would have provided most of the workforce and labor in the region, and so staying on their good side was important. However, their old ways would not have been completely erased. The Aztec most likely still gave praise to Tepoztecatl, the deity of their favorite alcoholic beverage called pulque. The painting may have been put up along with images of the Virgin Mary. This would have been part of a plan to slowly but firmly transition the locals to accept Jesus as their savior. Ancient work from home. Archaeologists working in Belize have discovered evidence of ancient Maya salt makers who worked from home long before now. Researchers found salt kitchens from 1,500 years ago attached directly to the houses of the workers. Instead of going to a factory, they did their jobs from the safety of their own homes. For the Maya, working from home was a matter of convenience and effectiveness. By doing this, they would have been significantly more productive and were able to produce salt throughout the whole year. This was extremely important because salt was a major commodity in the Maya kingdom. Maya cities near the coast were able to process salt. Then they would trade that to the cities inland who had no access to natural salt themselves. The discovery was made in Paynes Creek National Park at a place called Ta'ab Nuk Na. This was once the largest Maya salt working site in the region. Today, it's a natural reserve spanning over 37,000 acres along the Caribbean Sea. The area is now full of lagoons and swamps, but at one point it had been home to Maya houses. Most of those homes were made of wood, and so they have already deteriorated and are impossible to find. However, researchers did discover a few rare remains of these houses in a submerged area. Salt wasn't the only work the Maya did from home. They also would have been fishing, working with wood, cooking, spinning cotton, and grinding maize. In total, the workers living at Ta'ab Nukna would have produced about 1 ton of salt every week, enough for roughly 24,000 people. Monkey soldiers. It turns out that the Romans may have used monkeys in their military. Archaeologists in Europe and the UK have discovered the remains of several Barbary apes with formal burials and military offerings. The Barbary ape is not in fact an ape, but a monkey. These feisty macaques are native to northern Africa, found primarily in Algeria and Morocco. They can live to be about 30 years old. In ancient times, the monkeys migrated from Morocco into Spain, making it the only wild monkey species to live in modern Europe. Some of the remains of the monkeys go back to the Iron Age, while the majority are from the Middle Ages. Several of the remains are from the Roman Empire, and archaeologists were surprised to find the remains in excellent condition. Sadly, though, many of the monkeys had died in poor health. They had bad teeth, and there was evidence of a poor diet since they were way outside of their natural habitat. However, one of the most shocking Barbary apes ever found was in Livia, Spain. It lived in the 5th century AD and was buried with a small collection of grave goods. Somebody gave this monkey a human funeral, and in its grave they uncovered pottery fragments, iron objects, and bronze belt buckles. The belt buckles were typical for the late Roman period, usually worn by Roman military officers. What the discovery suggests is that the monkey was once part of the Roman army, or at least a soldier's beloved pet. Researchers don't know for sure if the monkey ever participated in a combat situation, but there's no denying it was buried with all the honors of a military officer. All we can say for certain is that when the monkey died, the soldiers grieved enough that they left their belt buckles in its grave. This was likely to honor the monkey's memory. Lagash. Scientists recently discovered a lost Mesopotamian city called Lagash. This city existed about 5,000 years ago in an ancient wetland between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in southern Iraq. Lagash was built atop 4 islands in the vast marshland, with each island connected by waterways. The Mesopotamians would have used canoes or small floating vessels to get around, just like in Venice today. Archaeologists with the University of Pennsylvania helped make the discovery using drones and other technology. Everything from remote sensing data to aerial photographs helped provide the location of the lost city. Researchers believe this place may have been one of the earliest states in Mesopotamia. However, there isn't much left of the old city now, as you can imagine. It was abandoned 3,600 years ago, and the water that once formed the marshlands is totally gone today. The city stood on mounds rising just out of the water, but now the whole region is a dried and barren desert. For that reason, very little of the original structures remain. This site is amazing because there is nothing but a few piles of stone no taller than your knee, with flat ground stretching in all directions. Yet in the 3rd millennium BC, Lagash was a Sumerian city-state and would have looked like a lush jungle paradise. It used to have towering temples and huge buildings occupied by tens of thousands of residents. There would have also been bustling markets where people traded everything from spices to weaponry. The half-floating metropolis was intersected by waterways, with beautifully colored plants hanging from walls and thick vines climbing up stone pillars. And now for number 5, but first, it's shoutout time! I want to say a big thank you to Little Shell 27 and Rolando Ochoa. Thanks so much for watching! If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more videos about amazing history and discoveries. Lost Canaanite Temple. A mysterious lost temple from 3,000 years ago was recently unearthed in southern Israel. The temple was built by the biblical Canaanite civilization around the time of the Israelite invasion. One of the most spectacular features of the temple is an idol of the legendary Canaanite god Baal, a deity that eventually shifted and became the Christian devil. This is a huge discovery because it's truly one of a kind, and nothing like it has been found in over half a century. Joseph Garfinkel from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem was the leader behind the excavation. They were searching for evidence of an Iron Age occupation when they came across the temple ruins in the lost city of Lachish, which is about 25 miles from Jerusalem. The researchers found the ruins of the temple on the second day of the project, which was a huge accomplishment. Going back to the Canaanite god Baal, a silver-plated bronze figurine of him was discovered inside the innermost sanctuary of the temple. He was found in a position smiting his enemies with one arm held over his head. This incredibly terrifying statue would have been at the center of the temple, and locals likely came from all over the city to give praise and offerings to the figurine. It was around the 13th century BC when Lachish fell to the Israelites. According to archaeological evidence and the Book of Joshua, the Israelites invaded and killed most of the people inside, and this temple could have been destroyed during the chaos. Sanctuary of Poseidon. Archaeologists have discovered a very impressive sanctuary at the top of a Greek hill. A team of researchers from Greece and Austria were investigating the lost city of Samikon in the southwest region of the country when they made the discovery. Excavations on the hilltop revealed the ruins of an enormous building. It's about 30 feet wide and 90 feet long, with walls that are 2 feet thick. Researchers identified a vestibule, a rear chamber, and a central sanctuary within the walls of the building. The sanctuary was likely used for worship of the temple's deity. Archaeologists say that the deity was almost definitely Poseidon, lord of the seven seas and brother of Zeus and Hades. It's not 100% confirmed yet, but archaeologists are fairly certain they have discovered the mythical sanctuary of Poseidon. It was constructed in the 6th century BC, specifically built to venerate Poseidon from Greek mythology. However, it's not entirely clear what happened to the sanctuary or when it was destroyed. It had likely been a place of pilgrimage, perhaps even one of the most sacred sites in Greece for centuries. Sadly, now, it's only a ruin. A lost landscape. Archaeologists from a university in Poland just discovered an ancient lost landscape. The team used LiDAR technology to unveil hundreds of ancient monuments strewn throughout a forest. This is a remote and thinly populated region along the border between Belarus and Poland. Researchers used lasers to complete a 3D digital map of the forest. By removing the woodland, they were able to look at the archaeological features hidden beneath. Amazingly, they found sites from prehistory all the way up until World War II. In an unprecedented reveal, archaeologists say they found 577 ancient burial pits, 246 charcoal sites, 19 farmland complexes, 51 dugouts, and 17 forgotten war cemeteries. Most of the archaeological remains come from the Roman era, between the 2nd and 5th century AD. A few of these sites have been excavated already, but many are entirely new. Polish scientists say the area has been a favorite place for small settlements to grow and prosper for thousands of years. The landscape is at the ideal elevation, and there is access to rivers and streams, and so small communities often spring up in the woods. However, these days there's almost nobody out there. The big cities drew everyone away, and the forest hasn't seen much activity since the Middle Ages, aside from the fighting in World War II. Mysterious ancient structure. Archaeologists have discovered a structure in the Czech Republic that dates back 7,000 years. That's older than Stonehenge. It's a circular structure approximately 180 feet in diameter called a roundel. It was constructed during the Neolithic period between 4900 and 4600 BC. This formation and others like it are the oldest massive structures built by human hands in Europe. This particular roundel was uncovered just outside of Prague, and it's one of over 200 that have been identified across the European continent. And yet, researchers are still trying to understand what the purpose of these circular structures were. They were erected by people in the Stone Age, but nobody can explain why. One of the most prominent theories is that the roundel was a trade center. It may have been an ancient place where humans from all over the region gathered to barter and exchange goods. On the flip side, it could have been something a lot darker. Some researchers believe these sites may have been used by early religious cults. Blood could have been spilled on the ground here, perhaps during a rite of passage or a mysterious ritual. Whatever the case may be, these structures are still impressive, considering humans back then only possessed tools made from stone and bone. Royal Hall of East Anglia. Traces of a legendary royal hall from the days of East Anglia have been recently discovered in England. BBC News reported that the royal hall is estimated to be around 1400 years old. Its remnants were found within a medieval settlement located in Suffolk County. The official name of the structure is the Hall of the First Kings of East Anglia. According to archaeologist Christopher Scull, the hall is the most extensive, wealthy settlement of its time ever discovered in the country. It wasn't unearthed in a big archaeological dig, but was revealed during a small community project organized by the county's council. Historians were already aware of the building because it was recorded in the 8th century by a man known only as the Venerable Bede. He described it as the place where Ethelwold, king of East Anglia, attended the baptism of King Swithelm of the East Saxons. From between 570 and 720 AD, the Royal Hall was the central government building in the East Anglian Kingdom. Like the White House, this place was the seat of the East Anglian government. Aside from the building itself, researchers have made all kinds of fantastic discoveries. They uncovered a perimeter ditch that had once enclosed the compound where the royals lived. They also found jewelry, drinking vessels, scraps of pottery, and fragments from an earlier settlement during the Roman occupation. Archaeologists discovered evidence of massive feasts that took place here as well. The royal men and women who lived here ate huge quantities of meat, primarily beef and pork. Moonmilk face cream. In 2018, researchers discovered a tomb in China dating back 2,700 years. It was the tomb of a nobleman, and among his treasures and grave goods, they discovered something odd. They came across a small bronze jar filled with weird lumps of what looked like hardened white and yellow powder. Scientists from the Chinese Academy of Sciences couldn't wait to find out what it was. Yimin Yang and his team completed a full chemical analysis on the substance. They soon identified it as face cream, making it one of the earliest known examples of a man using cosmetics in China. Archaeologists believe that this man was an elite member of society during the spring and autumn period, between 771 and 476 BC. So, what was this mysterious formula? It was a mix of animal fat and moon milk, a unique material found in limestone caves. The combination would have worked as a whitening powder, making the user's face pale when applied. There are other face lotions that have been found in tombs of elite members of Chinese society, indicating that 2,700 years ago, the cosmetic industry was booming. Before the recent find, the oldest example of cosmetics found in the grave of a Chinese man dated to the Three Kingdoms period, from 220 to 280 AD. This new skin cream pushes back that date almost 1,000 years. It was most likely used during special ceremonies and was also used to whiten the face. The elite loved to use these types of creams to appear more youthful, so they could lord over the rest of the people and also show off that they didn't have to work in the sun. Ancient flying machine. In a secret chamber underneath the ancient temple of Srinagar in India, an unbelievable discovery was allegedly made. The chamber, about 2,000 years old, contained an ancient flying machine known as the Vimana. It happened in 2015 by accident, and immediately after, the chamber was closed and sealed, and access was forbidden. Not even the original archaeologists who made the discovery are allowed back in. Nobody knows why the discovery is being covered up, but it might have something to do with the small metallic aircraft hiding underneath the temple. The Vimana was something described in Indian legends and folklore. It was a hovering chariot of the gods, usually depicted as a flying temple or a hovering stone structure. Up until now, no evidence of one has ever been found. Most scientists and archaeologists agree the Vimana was nothing but a fantasy, a flying machine dreamed up in old fables. Others have suggested the Vimana was a way for ancient Indians to make sense of the mysterious flying saucers that came down from space. Unfortunately, there is no verification or proof that this discovery was made at all. All we have are rumors and speculation, and there are no legitimate sources discussing the flying machine hiding under the temple. Bronze Age plague. Scientists have always wondered what caused the sudden collapse of Bronze Age societies between 1200 and 1150 BC. In 50 short years, just about every major civilization in the Mediterranean and Near East region collapsed. Some have blamed it on the mysterious sea people. Some say there was a series of volcanic eruptions that decimated cities. But nobody has ever been able to confirm what really happened. A new genetic research project has suggested that it may have had to do with an explosion of plague and disease. Scientists from the Max Planck Institute, the British School at Athens, and Temple University worked together to solve the mystery. They were able to link deadly pathogens to a possible disease outbreak in ancient Egypt, Minoa, and Akkad. These researchers looked at 68 teeth found during excavations at Hagios Karalambos on the Greek island of Crete. This was once the seat of the Minoan civilization. Within these teeth, researchers identified the bacteria responsible for the Black Death, Yersinia pestis, and the bacteria that caused typhoid fever, Salmonella enterica. The team's educated guess is that a disease outbreak started in Greece and was spread through the ancient world, causing massive devastation. An outbreak of both the plague and typhoid fever may have brought about the destruction of the Bronze Age. The Wari treasure. A wealth of 1,300-year-old gold and silver has just been discovered by a group of archaeologists excavating a Peruvian necropolis. The ancient cemetery was found north of the capital of Lima. That puts it in the Wari era of Peru, when the Wari culture lived in the mountains and along the coastline of the Peruvian north. This was between roughly 500 and 1000 AD. The Wari Empire is most famous today for their rich artwork, masterfully painted pottery, woven textiles, and obsession with riches. They flourished around the same time as the Tiwanaku Empire in the south, and were often rivals. But by the year 1200, both had collapsed, and the Inca Empire had taken over their territories. Inside this necropolis, archaeologists found a mysterious tomb containing the remains of 7 people. 6 of them appear to have been buried elsewhere, and then brought to the tomb at a later date. According to the researchers from the University of Warsaw, 3 appear to be adolescents, with 2 adult males and 2 adult females. They were buried with an immense treasure of gold and silver, weapons, textiles, and leather items. They were most likely part of the elite Wari, but no one knows who they were for certain. This is a pretty big discovery, primarily because of what was found previously between 2012 and 2013. That was when these same researchers found the tomb of 3 Wari queens at the same site. The queens had apparently wielded immense power, since they were buried with 58 other people, many whom appeared to have been sacrificed and sent into the afterlife as slaves. With the discovery of this newest tomb, it's clear the whole place was once a grand mausoleum reserved for nobility and royalty. Ancient ritual bath. Archaeologists in Jerusalem recently unearthed over 2,000 years of ancient history near the Western Wall. One of their more unusual discoveries was an ornate villa complete with its own ritual bath. The Western Wall is considered one of the holiest places in Judaism. It's the last vestige of the original Temple Mount, built by King Herod in the 1st century BC and destroyed by the Romans shortly after. Millions of tourists and worshippers flock to its crumbling stone every year. In 2017, the city decided to build an elevator so that disabled people didn't have to climb the 142 steps to reach the sacred site. So in 2019, archaeologists started excavating ahead of the construction. Only recently did they reveal some of their findings. While excavating ahead of the elevator, researchers found the wealthy villa. or rather the skeleton of an ancient house occupied shortly before the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD. The villa still had cooking pots inside of it, and there was a water cistern which fed a private bath known as a mikveh. We don't know who lived here, but the person must have been very wealthy. The villa was only 300 feet from the largest temple in Jerusalem before the Romans destroyed it, meaning it must have been prime real estate. The Nefertiti Chambers. British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves has a theory that behind a wall painting in the tomb of legendary boy pharaoh Tutankhamun, there is a secret chamber, or chambers. These alleged chambers supposedly hold the long-lost tomb of Queen Nefertiti. And although this theory has not technically been proven correct, researchers are currently investigating it, and they may have made some headway. They recently used infrared thermography and radar scanning to look through the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb. What they do is send waves through the stone that then bounce back into their instruments. The waves change depending on what kind of material they encounter, and this allows scientists to create a 3D map of what's beyond the wall. When they did their most recent scans, they identified a mysterious void. There appears to be an empty room sealed by Tutankhamun's tomb walls, and it's big enough to be a tomb itself. George Ballard, a leading expert in radar and geophysical investigations, says the north wall is false and blocks the entrance to a secret tomb. The next step in the process is to drill a hole through the wall and send fiber optics to look inside. This hasn't been done yet, but when it is complete, hopefully we'll solve the mystery once and for all. And now for number 5. But first, want to say a big thank you to you. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing and mysterious discoveries. Angkor Wat's Mystery Stones. For decades, archaeologists have wondered how in the world the 12th century temple of Angkor Wat in Cambodia was built. The temple is huge. It's positively monumental. It's beyond the scope of what should have been feasible 800 years ago. The temple was constructed using upwards of 10 million huge sandstone bricks. Some bricks weigh 3,300 pounds on their own. The bricks all came from special quarries found at the base of a mountain, far enough away that it would have been quite the hassle to move them. Archaeologists have always known the rock came from quarries, but they were never able to figure out how the bricks made it from the bottom of the mountain to the temple, until now. Scientists from Waseda University in Japan surveyed the area. They documented 50 quarries and looked through satellite images to make connections. They uncovered an ancient network of canals and roads linking the quarries of Mount Kulen to Angkor Wat. There was an entire grid system allowing for multiple routes to the temple. Workers would have piled the raw stone in the boats, then paddled up the canals like they were moving through midday traffic. Not only does this solve the mystery of how the massive bricks of the Cambodian temple were transported, but it also explains how the complex was built so quickly. Angkor Wat was completed in just a couple of decades, likely due to the effectiveness of the canals. Secrets of the Stone Tablet. In the 6th century BC, the Etruscans built a 500-pound tablet of solid stone. It was discovered at the Poggio Cola site in Tuscany and dates back over 2,500 years. The mysterious stone slab, also known as a stele, bears an inscription in a long-lost language that hasn't been used since 500 years before the rise of the Roman Empire. According to project archaeologist Gregory Warden from the Southern Methodist University in Dallas, this giant slab of rock could be the most important Etruscan discovery in recent decades. The Etruscans came onto the scene in Italy around 700 BC, specifically in the north and east of Italy. They were a highly religious society who believed in a large pantheon of gods. They flourished, created new forms of art, and became a highly advanced civilization. Then, very slowly, between 500 BC and 100 BC, the Etruscans, their gods, and their rituals were absorbed into Rome. This huge stone tablet seems to give a hint as to one particular cult cherished by the Etruscans. Translation is still underway, but a few words have been made clear. There's mention of the fertility goddess Uni. Considering other evidence of a fertility cult has been discovered at Poggiocola, researchers believe it may have been a center for cult worship of Uni. This is a huge deal because we know almost nothing about the rituals and beliefs of the Etruscans. Unlike so many ancient civilizations who left messages carved in stones, the Etruscans mostly wrote on fabrics and wax tablets. All of their writing has been lost except for the occasional script on a tombstone. This tablet, which is about 4 feet tall and 2 feet wide, made of pure sandstone, is one of the first major texts discovered written by the Etruscans. There is a long process ahead to clean and translate, but it could reveal secrets archaeologists are desperate to learn. And let's be honest, we're pretty excited too. LeToi footprint trails. 3.6 million years ago in Tanzania, a group of primitive humans walked through a layer of wet volcanic ash. The ash had recently been spewed out of a nearby volcano. They left their tracks in the ash. Then the volcano erupted again. A second layer of ash promptly covered and preserved what are currently considered the oldest known human footprints in the world. They are called the LeToi footprints. According to the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, they were likely made by Australopithecus afarensis. The trail is 88 feet long and includes the rough impressions of an estimated 70 primitive hominids. The discovery was made in 1978 by Paul Abel. From the footprints alone, we can tell a lot about our ancient ancestors. They had exceptionally big toes in line with the rest of their feet, a much more human feature than an ape feature. Researchers also identified how the humans were walking, and it was very similar to how we walk. Each person put their heel on the ground, rolled their foot, and pushed off with their toes. It shows that nearly 4 million years ago, we had already diverged a lot from other primates. But we still had some huge differences. For example, it's clear by the space between the prints that the early humans had very short legs. They wouldn't have been able to go very far and likely only stood a few feet tall. And while researchers believe they were Australopithecus afarensis, the truth is that we don't really know. They could have been an entirely undiscovered race of early humans. The Yellow River Civilization. The Yellow River Civilization lived in China 3,000 years ago. As the name suggests, they lived alongside the Yellow River northwest of Shanghai. One of their major settlements was the Zhangzhou Shangdu site, where researchers just discovered an extremely rare gold funeral mask. The mask dates to the Shang dynasty of between 1600 and 1046 BC. Researchers believe it may have had something to do with a mysterious burial ritual or a death ceremony. The mask also shows that the culture at Zhangzhou Shangdu had an obsession with gold. Who doesn't, really? The mask was found inside a tomb which most likely belonged to a noble. It contained a lot more than the mask as well, including an array of burial objects of unbelievably high quality: bronze and jade weapons, artifacts inlaid with turquoise, and even gold shell coins. Nobody knows what exactly the gold mask was used for. It may have been placed over the face of the deceased as part of a ritual, or it may have been worn by somebody at the funeral and then buried with the dead. It also may be directly connected to the mysterious Sanxingdui culture of ancient China. Very little is known about the origins of this Chinese civilization, other than the most ancient sites are found along the Yellow River. Since 2018, the National Cultural Heritage Administration has undertaken 200 excavations to try and put together how society rose up along the banks of the river. Many of their projects are still ongoing. Prehistoric Britain. Archaeologists in Britain unearthed evidence of people living near Canterbury 600,000 years ago. The Department of Archaeology at the University of Cambridge investigated a mysterious site with evidence of an archaic species of human called Homo heidelbergensis. This ancient relative of ours isn't quite as old as Australopithecus afarensis, but may have been a direct ancestor of Neanderthals. Researchers believe Homo heidelbergensis descended from Homo erectus during the early expansion of hominids leaving Africa. Early humans are known to have been present in Britain from as early as 950,000 years ago, but their visits were very brief. Researchers have never been able to fully understand why. The prevailing theory is that Britain was warming and cooling, and so primitive humans ventured in warm weather only to be pushed back by the cold. This newest discovery consists of flint tools besides an ancient river. It looks like the tools were used to process animal carcasses. They would have been used to carve the hides off extinct animals like prehistoric woolly rhinos and other creatures we probably haven't even heard of. 620,000 years ago, Britain was a popular hunting ground in the summer. Satanic altar. In Edinburgh, Scotland, there is a place called the Queen's Holyrood Park. It's a peaceful and secluded place where archaeologists just unearthed two very creepy objects. They came across a pair of metal plaques depicting demonic symbols. Each plaque has its own upside-down pentagram with a horned monster in its center. In all likelihood, the demonic entity is supposed to be Baphomet, Lord of the Damned. The objects were also found near what appears to be an altar. The suggestion here is that archaeologists accidentally discovered a place of devil worship. The Queen's Park was established around 1128 AD by King David I of Scotland. King David used it as his own personal hunting grounds. Over time, the park shrank until it became a small royal park outside the residence of the kings and queens of Scotland. It's a place of rich history, and so what in the world was it doing with satanic symbols buried underneath its lawn? According to the report in the Edinburgh Evening News, the metal plaques and altar were embedded just beneath the topsoil. Researchers also found rune stones and other objects which have not been identified. Historic Environment Scotland was behind the discovery, though nobody can say with any certainty what exactly we're dealing with here. Some experts have suggested the symbolism is reminiscent of the pagans, while others have argued it is more demonic in nature. We don't know how old these things are yet, if they are ancient or were buried recently by a satanic cult. For all we know, these plaques were left behind by a group of ancient worshippers of a horn-headed entity going back thousands of years. Strange burial in Germany. In 1962, construction workers in Brandenburg, Germany, accidentally discovered some human bones. An archaeological investigation ensued, and experts found the skeletal remains of 6 people. These people died around 8,000 years ago in 6000 BC, when Germany was occupied by hunter-gatherers. In 2012, the site was excavated again. This time, researchers found 3 additional burials from around the same time. We now know this is one of the oldest graveyards in all of Germany. Human graves from 8,000 years ago are not common, so the discovery is a pretty big deal. Most finds from that period come in the form of stone tools. Mesolithic people rarely buried their dead, instead choosing to burn them. It wasn't until humans began looking at death from a more creative point of view that they made up their own rituals, religions, and other motivators to bury the dead instead of just disposing of them. There was one particular burial found in the graveyard that archaeologists found rather exceptional and a little spooky. The burial process was incredibly strange. A young man was buried standing upright 7,000 years ago. First, the man was put into a vertical pit, one wide enough so that he was kept upright by the earthen walls. Then the pit was filled with sand up to his knees, so that his body would stay upright long after he was buried. Then, for whatever reason, the grave was left open. We know this because the upper part of his body was ravaged by scavengers. The grave wasn't filled up until much later, long after the body had already decayed. The South Uist mummies. In 2001, archaeologists found the remains of 2 female adults, 1 male adult, and a small child. They were discovered in the ruins of a Bronze Age village in South Uist. These individuals turned out to be prehistoric mummies, and the first of their kind identified in the British Isles. They were found buried in the fetal position and had originally been bandaged and bound with cords and straps of leather. According to experts from Sheffield University who investigated the remains, they were wrapped, then strung up so their bodies would stay in the fetal position after death. Even stranger, the bodies weren't all buried at the same time. The male was buried around 3,500 years ago, and the other bodies many centuries later. The houses they were found under were 500 years newer than the bodies. Then things got even creepier. Researchers were shocked to discover one of the women wasn't totally herself. Her skeletal remains were a mix of body parts from 3 other people. Scientists went back to the male and examined his body, and they found the same thing to be true about him. Scientists are baffled by whatever happened here. These prehistoric people were dismembered and then reassembled for seemingly no reason at all. It's shout-out time! Big thank you to Jorge Gonzalez Larramendi for the super thanks. We really appreciate your support. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family because you know we'd love to have you. Aztec skull masks. In the ruins of Tenochtitlan, the ancient capital of the Aztec, archaeologists uncovered terrifying Aztec skull masks. One of the greatest discoveries of skull masks came 30 years ago at Templo Mayor, located in the historic center of Mexico City. 8 masks crafted from human skulls were found in the temple. Their origins and their purpose have remained a mystery ever since. Scientists aren't entirely sure why the Aztec felt it necessary to make masks out of human skulls. We don't know if these were decorations, used in ceremonies, or some sick and twisted art project. What we do know is that Templo Mayor was dedicated to the Aztec God of War, Huitzilopochtli, after its construction around the 15th century AD. Archaeologists have found ample evidence of human sacrifice. We know sacrifice played a major role in the Aztec religion. Extracting the heart, burning people alive, ritualistic fights to the death. It was all just part of being Aztec. But even for the Aztec, these skull masks are strange. One theory has been proposed by archaeologist Corey Ragsdale. He suggests these skull masks were decorative headpieces made from the bones of slain warriors. The back part of the cranium was taken out, the front of the skull was decorated with colorful dye, and there were even inlays to make eyes. They were likely worn during ritual sacrifices, making them just that much creepier. Polish vampires. In southern Poland, road construction revealed 14 skeletons buried with their heads decapitated and placed in weird spots. Archaeologists have reason to believe these skeletons were vampires, or at least perceived to be vampires. 11 of these skeletons had their skulls between their knees. 1 had their skull placed between their hands, and 2 had their skulls resting on their shoulders. Almost all of them were female. Here's the thing about Slavic countries in the Middle Ages. Burying a person with their head anywhere but at the top of their neck was associated with vampirism and witchcraft. If someone was perceived to be a vampire, or a witch who might come back from the dead, their head needed to be removed. The idea was that when the person reanimated, they would soon find themselves without their head and unable to get out of their grave. Without their head on their neck, they wouldn't even be able to coordinate an attempt to free themselves. Victims of this type of burial often had their hands tied and their feet weighed down with heavy boulders for a bit of added protection. It's unclear who these people were, although it's fairly obvious who the locals thought they were. All 14 victims were most likely seen as vampires when they were buried in the Middle Ages. There was likely a vampire panic in this small village, which led to the bizarre and ritualized burials of over a dozen people. The Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden was one of the most brutal torture devices of the Middle Ages. The notorious contraption, known in Germany as the Jungfer, was famously violent. A person would be placed inside a human-sized cage filled with spikes. Then, when the cage was shut, the spikes would impale the victim. That's the Iron Maiden in a nutshell. But the truth behind the creepy device is that we don't have any official accounts of it being used in medieval times. Some historians have even suggested the majority of torture devices were made up by fraudsters in the 19th century. Many of the most heinous torture devices may have never even been used. The first written testimony of an Iron Maiden being used is from the 18th century. Historian Philip Siebenkees wrote that a criminal was executed using the device in 1515, and that the spikes were designed too short to fully impale the man. It took 2 days for him to bleed out inside the contraption. However, this historian was most likely a fraud. Modern historians believe he either invented the story himself or misinterpreted a totally different medieval device called the Schandmantel, or the coat of shame. This was used by the Germans to publicly humiliate poachers and other criminals. It was a human-sized cage, but it didn't have any spikes inside it. It was just a way to shame those convicted of crimes out in the open for all the townspeople to see. The bog body. Throughout Europe, thousands of naturally mummified corpses have been discovered in ancient wetlands. These are called bog bodies, and most of them were thrown into swamps and quagmires during the prehistoric period. Most of them also met untimely and violent ends, often being the victims of murder. Scientists are still struggling to understand why murder victims were so often tossed into swamps. Recently, scientists based at the Wageningen University in the Netherlands took a deep dive into bog bodies. They analyzed 1,000 bodies found across Europe and were shocked to see nearly all of them showed signs of overkill. These people weren't just murdered and thrown in the swamp. They were brutalized in extreme and unimaginable ways. Up until now, there have been a few main theories about why people were thrown into bogs. The most common explanation has been ritual sacrifice. Archaeologists have always figured the ancient people thought the bogs had power and gave sacrifices to the swamp gods. But that doesn't account for the extreme violence. Not necessarily. The new study has shown that for 7,000 years, certain people were killed in an absolutely heinous fashion and then thrown into the bogs. If it was the result of ritual activity, their deaths would have been performed the same way. Instead, we see violence that has a certain anger to it. The new theory is that these people weren't ritual sacrifices. They were criminals. These may have been people who broke social convention and were punished accordingly. Then their bodies were left in bogs to be preserved, like human raisins. The dancing skeleton. In Russia's Far East, scientists unveiled a skeleton from the Dark Ages. He was found in a medieval graveyard near Ust-Ivanovka, used between the 7th and 9th centuries. He was nicknamed the Dancing Skeleton because when researchers opened his grave, it looked like he was doing a little dance. Archaeologist Denis Volkov said the man had been laid to rest on his back, with his legs sprawled out and his knees crossed as if he was in the middle of a dance. Archaeologists found it bizarre because there were no burial ceremonies from the Dark Ages known for such an unusual position of a body. What makes the skeleton so creepy is that its final pose was not an accident. Researchers agree that for his limbs to have been found in such a position, he would have needed to be tied up that way. Someone wanted him to look like this. Plus, whoever buried the guy placed arrows on his shoulders as part of the ritual, while an arrow tip was found embedded in his hip. He may have died from an arrow wound, but why he was buried in such an odd way is still unknown. Prehistoric cannibal. 800,000 years ago in Spain, prehistoric cannibals feasted on a human child. It honestly doesn't get much more disturbing than that. The victim of this horrific display of violence is known today as the Boy of Grandolina. However, a recent new analysis of his ancient remains have revealed he was really a girl. The young female child was a Homo antecessor, an ancient species of hominin that evolved in Europe about 1.2 million years ago. Her skeletal remains were found in a cavern in Spain's Atapuerca Mountains in 1994. When the remains were first investigated, scientists determined them to belong to a boy who was 13 years old at the time of death. The more recent analysis showed the remains are really those of a girl who died between the age of 9 and 11. To make things even creepier, the young girl wasn't the only victim of ruthless cannibalism. Researchers found 22 other individuals in the cavern who had been cannibalized. I won't get into the grimy details, but it was pretty heinous. Scientists believe the cannibalism likely resulted from pure laziness. Researcher Jesus Rodriguez says prehistoric people were well aware how nutritious their fellow humans were, and how much easier humans were to catch than other animals. The cursed tomb. Archaeologists found an ancient tomb marker in Israel cursing all those foolish enough to enter. 1,800 years ago, a man named Jacob the Proselyte did not want anyone messing around with his tomb. He had the foresight to curse all those who would even try to enter it before he died. Prior to his death, he scrawled a curse across his tomb in blood-red letters. The curse read simply, "Any who open this grave will be cursed." It must have seemed at the time an effective countermeasure against grave robbers. But it turns out the curse was written in crimson paint, not blood. Sorry to disappoint. The tomb itself is at the ancient Jewish necropolis of Beit She'arim in Galilee, uncovered during the most recent excavations. The grave marker shows Jacob was 60 when he died, and that he had converted to Judaism from some other religion. Unfortunately, the curse didn't keep out all the grave robbers. According to archaeologists from Tel Aviv University, he was looted anyway after his death, and his body taken from his tomb. Jacob, the proselyte, tried desperately to curse all those who entered, only to have his body stolen and his grave pilfered anyway. Han Dynasty tombs. The Han Dynasty ruled China for about 400 years. Throughout that time, there were over 20 emperors on the throne, many of which were buried near the ancient capital of Chang'an. The Terracotta Army may be the most spectacular tomb ever found in China, but the Han emperors' tombs are also pretty impressive. They don't have over 8,000 soldiers made of terracotta to look after them like Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, but their tombs are still remarkable in their own way. In fact, the Han Dynasty tombs are some of the most extraordinary tombs in the world, so complex that many of them resemble royal palaces. The emperors were buried with their favorite concubines and weapons of war. Their tombs also turned up musical instruments, as well as their favorite food. These emperors went into the afterlife with everything they could have possibly needed. One of the most amazing tombs uncovered belonged to Emperor Wu of Han, who ruled China between 141 BC and 87 BC. His tomb is now known as the Maoling Mausoleum, and it's the biggest of all the rulers of Han China. The burial mound was unfortunately looted by rebels in the 1st century, and yet there were still enough artifacts found by modern archaeologists to fill an entire warehouse. The ship in the Northwest Passage. A ship failed to cross the Northwest Passage and sank, but it was discovered in the Arctic 168 years later. The ship is called the HMS Terror, and it was launched in June of 1813. At the time, it was one of the most advanced pieces of military machinery in the world. Its hull was designed specifically to resist explosions, and it fought against the United States during the War of 1812. In 1845, the warship was joined by an exploring ship called the HMS Erebus, and together they navigated the passage between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Unfortunately, all 129 men aboard the two vessels died, and for a century and a half their story was lost to the icy waters of the Arctic. But in 2014, the HMS Erebus was discovered in Canadian waters, and the HMS Terror was found 2 years later. The 19th century was a time of great exploration. Much of the Arctic coastline had already been explored, and the British were confident they could finally find the shorter shipping route to China and India. And so they sent 2 of their best ships on a journey that should have changed history. Instead, the ships became trapped in the Arctic ice, and the men began to die from malnutrition and disease. Some of them even resorted to cannibalism, and others walked off into the snow and died alone. These ships were found exactly where the crew left them, but they are currently resting at the bottom of the Arctic. Crews are hoping to salvage the vessels soon and get them into a museum. The heads of Greek gods. Archaeologists excavating the ancient Phrygian city of Aizanoi recently discovered a collection of heads belonging to Greek gods and heroes. The city was built during the Hellenistic period of early Greece, and it was ruled by the Pergamon and Bithynia kingdoms, depending on who was in power. Then, in 133 BC, Aizanoi was taken by the Romans. The most impressive buildings here date from the earliest time of the empire to the 3rd century AD. That was when Aizanoi became an important political center for the Roman province Phrygia Pacatiana. The city survived a little while after the fall of the Roman Empire, but it didn't make it past the 7th century. The town eventually fell into disrepair and was largely abandoned. Aizanoi was recently investigated by archaeologists from the nearby Kutaia Dum Lupinar University. Within the city, they found the severed stone heads of Greek gods, Eros, Dionysus, and even Hercules, the son of Zeus. This was after previous excavations when they found the head of goddess Aphrodite and a headless statue of Hercules. It's not clear where the heads of these statues belong. or where the rest of their bodies are. There is a good possibility that during the decline of the city, the statues were vandalized on purpose and left to be buried under centuries of mud. But before then, these statues were likely found in temples dedicated to certain gods, where ancient Greeks prayed to them for guidance and luck. The fossilized flower. A flower bloomed in a forest somewhere in the Baltics 40 million years ago, but tree resin dripped onto the petals, trapping the flower in a solid chunk of amber. The extremely unique fossilized flower was then uncovered in 1872. It was added to a collection of other fossils in Berlin and was largely forgotten about. And it wasn't until recently that modern scientists took a fresh look at the immortalized flower, calling it specimen X4088. Amazingly, scientists have now identified it as an entirely new plant. It's been named Symplochos koalouski, and it's the largest flower fossilized in amber found anywhere in the world. Scientist Eva Maria Sadowski from Berlin's Natural History Museum was behind the identification of the flower. She says it closely resembles another genus of flowering plants that are common in Asia right now, known as Symplochos, a type of tree or shrub that produces yellow or white flowers. It's an amazing glimpse into the plant life of Earth's ancient history, of which we know very little about. It's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Tyrannus, Fernandi, and Miss Water for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries. Ancient Chinese coin swords. Coin swords are some of the coolest discoveries that have been made from ancient China. They are sometimes called cash swords, but they aren't real weapons. Instead, they are feng shui talismans that have been around for an estimated 4,000 years. Chinese coin swords weren't used to battle physical enemies, they were used to scare away evil spirits. And even after all these years, coin swords are still used today in modern Taoist rituals. Nobody knows when the first coin sword was crafted. Legends place them at being made starting around the 26th century BC, during the rule of the legendary Yellow Emperor. Unfortunately, historical records from that time are scarce at best, and most of our information starts in the 7th century BC. It was around that time when the swords became popular throughout China, so they must have been around a while before then. Followers of Taoism believed evil entities were scared off by the coin swords because of Zhangkui, a Chinese deity revered for vanquishing evil beings. Then, over the years, the swords became more and more complicated. Some added astrological carvings and new elements to give them even more spiritual power. These swords were crafted out of coins wrapped around an iron rod, fixed in place by string or wire, and they were often decorated in wrappings of red or gold. Traditionally, there would be 18 coins on the blade, 10 coins on the hilt, and 108 of them in total. But all of the coins had to be produced during the time of a single emperor. Otherwise, it was bad luck, and your sword wouldn't work to fight off evil spirits. The Jericho Man. The face of a Neolithic man who lived in Jericho 9,500 years ago was revealed for the first time in 2016. His skull was discovered by archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon in the ruins of Jericho in 1953. And since then, scholars from the British Museum have managed to create an extremely accurate facial reconstruction of the Jericho Man. Kathleen and her team found 7 skulls that had been turned into sculptures. The pale bone of these skulls were covered in paint, and the eye sockets were stuffed with shells. They'd also been reburied as part of an unknown ancient ritual. These 7 skulls were then split up and sent to different museum collections across the world. In 2016, researchers at the British Museum created the first 3D model of one of the Jericho skulls. But it wasn't easy. They had to digitally remove the material covering the bone to see what the person looked like while they were alive. But now, this process has been done even better. 3D designer Cicero Moraes and his colleagues used an advanced method to create the most lifelike reconstruction of the Jericho Man yet. And to their surprise, he looked just like an ordinary man, except his skull was significantly larger than average, likely due to cranial deformation as a child. This was done to make his head seem bigger, not elongated like what was practiced later on in places like Peru. But that still hasn't solved the mystery of the 7 skulls. Scholars have been debating why Neolithic people decorated and reburied skulls, and they've never come to a consensus. However, one of the strongest theories is that it was a form of ancestor worship, a way to celebrate someone's life achievements after their death. Ancient chewing gum. Researchers from the University of Copenhagen recently used an ancient piece of chewing gum to extract the human genome of someone who lived during the Stone Age. The ancient gum is 5,700 years old and wasn't exactly the refreshing treat it is today. Back then, it was a lump of pitch tar, and apparently it was chewed by a Danish woman around 700 years before Stonehenge was built. As shocking as it seems, Paleolithic people had their own version of chewing gum. The Stone Age woman and other people who lived back then chewed gum for many reasons. Tar and birch pitch were both used as an adhesive during the Stone Age. People chewed it to make it warmer, which allowed them to better apply it to their tools. But tar was also chewed because of its antiseptic properties, which alleviated the pain of things like toothaches. And surprisingly, many people chewed gum in the Stone Age just because they enjoyed it. But it's not even the gum that's the most exciting part of the discovery. According to Hans Schroeder from the University of Copenhagen, the team was able to create a complete genetic profile of the woman who chewed the gum. They learned the color of her skin, hair, and eyes, and they were even able to see the genomes of tinier species that lived inside her mouth. One of the most interesting revelations was that the woman, nicknamed Lola, had very dark skin. It's further evidence that Northern Europeans only evolved to have lighter skin much later. Mesopotamian perfume. Archaeologists were excavating the ancient Assyrian city-state of Assur when they came across a mysterious cuneiform tablet. The tablet, once translated, was found to contain the formula for a perfume fragrance. The original formula was put together by a renowned female perfume maker named Taputi, and now the fragrance has been recreated in Turkey for the first time in 3,200 years. It wasn't too difficult to recreate the Mesopotamian perfume. After all, the tablet was easy to follow because the steps Taputi used to create the scent were easily listed in order. Historians believe that the perfume maker was likely famous during her lifetime. She may have been one of the finest producers of expensive fragrances in all of Mesopotamia. Not only that, but she may have also been one of the first female chemists in history. Turkish scientists working with the Smell Academy and Scent Culture Association only needed to follow the directions to recreate the perfume, and the scent that they created was a huge success. To create the fragrance, they needed multiple types of flowers, horseradish, myrrh, and balsam, along with some other secret ingredients. The only issues they faced were that some of the ingredients were unattainable. Many flowers that existed in 1200 BC have since gone extinct. The end result was a sweet-smelling perfume that's likely close to the original scent that Taputi created. Reading about the past is one thing, but smelling the past? That really brings things back to life. Roman-era mausoleum in France. In Nery-les-Bains, France, local archaeologists believe they uncovered the remains of a mausoleum built by a Roman colony in the 1st century AD. They excavated several buildings from 2,000 years ago, though there's almost nothing left of them today. The ruins were found under several inches of dirt and grass, nothing but some crumbling lime mortar and broken stones. Archaeologists are still working to figure out what they've uncovered, but it could be one of the most important Roman-era discoveries in France. They even found fragments of a frieze, which appears to portray the Greek god of the sea, Triton, their version of Poseidon. Everything already discovered points to the complex being a mausoleum, a tomb, or possibly even a family burial ground for wealthy Romans far from the capital. Researchers just need a bit more time to figure out who in the world was buried here, and what role they may have played in Roman-occupied France. New Egyptian tombs. At the end of 2022, Spanish archaeologists made a brilliant discovery in the city of Luxor in Egypt. They uncovered a new pair of burial tombs beneath the modern city, complete with at least 60 mummies. The tombs appear to have some connection with the vizier Amenhotep Hui, the advisor who whispered in Amenhotep III's ear during the 18th dynasty. Amenhotep III ruled between 1390 BC and 1352 BC, and his advisor of the same name was likely his most trusted ally. After the death of the vizier, he was buried in his own grand tomb, but at some point it became a necropolis. 2 additional chambers were added to the sides of his tomb and were then filled with the mummified remains of lower-class citizens. We know they were lower class because nobody from high society would be caught dead in a tomb filled with 29 other people. There was also a lack of epigraphy, meaning there weren't any amazing pieces of artwork showing the success of their lives. These were ordinary folk who had just enough money to be mummified, but not enough to get their own tomb. The big question here has to do with the vizier. Why was Amenhotep Hui's tomb turned into a burial ground for commoners? It would be like if ordinary people were suddenly jammed into the private tomb of the Queen of England. It just doesn't make sense. Thanks for watching. Which discovery was your favorite? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back soon. Bye!